Hello and welcome to week 9, or is it week 8? Just a sudden mental block, week 9. Anyway, you've all done well. I've been reading your A2 assignments and great job. I've been really enjoying it. I notice constructivism and securitization is really popular, so I'm going to take a bit of that angle this week. I also want to remind you that Collaborate for A3 is on next Thursday night at 7:30 p.m. So I hope you can all make it. Otherwise, it will be recorded. Emily, the other ELA, will be leading that one, and I'll be putting in my 2 cents worth as well. But hope to see you there. Now, economic inequality. Really what I wanted to point out today is that firstly, there's some really great discussions going on in the thread, which I really appreciate. But secondly, I am going to highlight the different ways in which we can approach this, which a number of students have already touched on different approaches. Firstly, there's been some discussion around traditional approaches. I mentioned that you could approach it from a liberal perspective, for example, looking at topics such as trade wars and how nations try to trade together or fail to cooperate, and how this is considered to increase economic insecurity or be an issue in terms of inequality. So organisations like the World Trade Organization really rely on the fundamental assumption that to trade and cooperate economically is to create peace. So a few other people mentioned how countries secure borders partly to avoid increasing economic issues and inequality. So that would be a more realist traditional perspective, possibly. I am going to come up with even a securitization perspective, since that has been popular for a lot of students. So this could happen, for example, if countries want to create a sense that someone is to blame for economic insecurities. That can destabilize entire governments. We saw this across Southeast Asian governments after the Asian financial crisis. There were several coups, for example, staged, or governments ousted because the general population was made to believe that they were responsible for the Asian financial crisis and corruption. And in fact, they probably were, but it's an example of legitimate or illegitimate how discourse can securitize an issue. The interesting thing is issues such as corruption existed long before the Asian financial crisis. But what happened is with that economic instability, all the factors were right, really, to create a major enemy out of governments that might have been around for 30 years and relatively stable. So that's when it really became a destabilizing force. Some other ways you could look at it would be a human security issue. Some people also mention this in the discussion threads. So one case I can think of is a friend of mine who runs a non-profit in Africa has talked about, due to lack of employment and work in certain areas, people travel far from home in order to find work, but this has created ethnic tensions and led to some undesirable spillover or domino effects in other areas, and so forth and so forth. So if you're really looking at it for your essay, you'll go into much deeper dimensions and, of course, some scholarly reading for that. But there's an example of a few different approaches to looking at economic inequality. So I want you to start to think every week around the discussion thread, not only what an issue is, but different ways that you might look at it, and start to develop your own preferences in preparation for assignment number 3.